What if I told you that losing 80 pounds in 1 year was the easy part? What if the real battle began when my own family turned against my success, whispering behind my back that I was getting too skinny and actively sabotaging every healthy choice I made? My name is Jaz Martinez, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the people closest to you can become your biggest obstacles, and how I learned to overcome them anyway. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Jaz Martinez had always been the big girl in her family. At 23, living in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, she carried 240 pounds on her 5'4" frame, like a weight she'd grown accustomed to bearing. Her mother, Carmen, would pat her cheek affectionately and say, "Mija, you're just built different than your sister. There's more of you to love." Her younger sister, Sofia, naturally slender and effortlessly graceful, would smile uncomfortably during these moments, never quite knowing what to say. The Martinez family owned a small but thriving Mexican restaurant called Abuela's Kitchen in the heart of Phoenix's Maryvale neighborhood. 3 generations of women had poured their hearts into that kitchen. Jaz's grandmother, Elena, her mother, Carmen, and now Jaz herself, who handled the books and occasionally helped with the dinner rush. Food wasn't just sustenance in the Martinez household. It was love, tradition, and identity, all rolled into warm tortillas and served with extra salsa. Every family gathering, and there were many, centered around massive spreads of Carmen's famous carnitas, Elena's legendary tamales, and Jaz's own contribution, tres leches cake that could make grown men weep. Jaz had learned early that food was how her family showed affection, celebrated victories, and comforted sorrows. When she graduated high school, they threw a feast. When her boyfriend broke up with her sophomore year of college, they threw a different kind of feast. When she dropped out of Arizona State University to help save the restaurant during the pandemic, the feast was bittersweet, but no less abundant. "Food is our culture, Jaz," her grandmother Elena would say, stirring a pot of pozole with a wooden spoon she'd brought from Guadalajara 50 years ago. "When we cook together, when we eat together, we keep our family strong." But on a scorching Tuesday morning in July, as Jaz struggled to climb the single flight of stairs to the restaurant's office, something inside her snapped. She'd made this climb thousands of times, but today her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird, and she had to stop halfway up to catch her breath. The Arizona heat seemed to press down on her with extra malice, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the early hour. At the top of the stairs, she caught her reflection in the glass door of the office. The young woman staring back at her looked tired. Not just physically tired, but tired in her soul. Her face was puffy, her eyes had lost their spark, and her favorite sundress, which had fit comfortably just months ago, now strained across her midsection. That reflection triggered a memory she'd been trying to suppress. 2 weeks earlier, at her cousin Maria's wedding reception, she'd been dancing with her 5-year-old nephew, Diego, when he had innocently asked, "Tia Jaz, why are you so big?" The question wasn't meant to hurt. Children rarely intend cruelty, but it hit her like a physical blow. Around them, the dance floor was full of relatives moving gracefully to the mariachi band, but Jaz suddenly felt like she was moving through molasses, disconnected from the joy surrounding her. She'd laughed it off that night, ruffling her Diego's hair and spinning him around until he forgot his question. But the words echoed in her mind for days afterward. Why was she so big? When had she stopped recognizing herself? When had she become someone who got winded climbing 12 steps? The breaking point came during her lunch break that Tuesday. Carmen had prepared Jaz as usual, a massive burrito filled with carnitas, refried beans, cheese, and sour cream, accompanied by a side of guacamole and chips. It was easily 1,200 calories, but it was tradition. Jaz ate lunch with her family every day at exactly noon, seated around the small table in the restaurant's back room where they discussed the day's business over heaping plates of comfort food. "Eat up, Mija," Carmen said, noticing Jaz pushing the food around on her plate. "You barely touched breakfast this morning." Breakfast had been 3 eggs scrambled with chorizo, cheese, and peppers, wrapped in flour tortillas and served with hash browns. Jaz had indeed barely touched it, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she'd felt uncomfortably full from the late-night snacking session the evening before, a habit she'd developed during the stress of keeping the restaurant afloat during the pandemic. As she sat there, mechanically taking bites of the burrito while her mother and grandmother chatted about inventory and the evening specials, Jaz felt a profound sense of disconnect. She loved her family fiercely, loved the restaurant that had been their livelihood for decades, loved the culture and traditions that the food represented. But somewhere along the way, she'd lost herself in all that love. The moment of clarity came when her phone buzzed with a text from her college roommate, Ashley Thompson, who lived in Seattle now. The message contained a photo from Ashley's weekend hiking trip to Mount Rainier. Ashley grinning broadly at the summit, surrounded by breathtaking mountain views, looking healthy and vibrant and fully alive. "Wish you were here," the text read. "Remember when we used to talk about hiking the Pacific Coast Trail together?" Jaz did remember. She remembered lots of dreams she'd once had, backpacking through Europe, learning to rock climb, maybe even running a marathon someday. But those dreams felt like they belonged to a different person, someone lighter in every sense of the word. That evening, after the restaurant closed and the family had gathered for their traditional late dinner, Jaz found herself really looking at her relatives, not just seeing them, but observing them with new eyes. Her grandmother, Elena, now 78, moved slowly and had developed diabetes 5 years earlier. Her mother, Carmen, at 52, had high blood pressure and took medication for her cholesterol. Her uncle, Roberto, Carmen's younger brother, who helped with the restaurant's maintenance, had suffered a minor heart attack the previous year at age 49. The pattern was undeniable, and Jaz realized with a chill that she was following the same path. The loving family traditions that had sustained 3 generations were also slowly killing them. Later that night, alone in her small apartment above the restaurant, Jaz stood on her bathroom scale for the first time in months. The digital display read 240 pounds, the highest number she had ever seen. But instead of the usual shame and self-loathing that such moments typically brought, she felt something different: determination. She opened her laptop and began researching. She read about nutrition, about sustainable weight loss, about the health risks associated with obesity. She learned about portion control and meal planning and the importance of regular exercise. Most importantly, she discovered that change was possible, difficult, requiring tremendous discipline and consistency, but absolutely possible. The next morning, Jaz woke up before dawn with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She laced up an old pair of sneakers she found in her closet and walked outside into the cool pre-sunrise air. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant hum of early commuters on the highway. She walked to the end of her block and back, maybe half a mile total, and returned home feeling like she'd accomplished something monumental. It was a small step, but it was the first step. As she showered and prepared for another day at the restaurant, Jaz made a silent promise to herself. She was going to reclaim her life, her health, and her dreams. She didn't know how her family would react, didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't continue living as she had been. The old Jaz, the one who had accepted being built different, who had found comfort in food and resignation in routine, was about to be challenged in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in years, the face looking back at herself from the bathroom mirror showed a glimmer of the spark that had been missing. The catalyst had been lit. The transformation was about to begin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 3 weeks into her morning walks, Jaz discovered something unexpected. She actually enjoyed the solitude of dawn.
The Phoenix streets at 5:30 a.m. belonged to a different world, cooler, quieter, filled with possibilities that seemed to evaporate once the desert sun climbed higher. She'd graduated from her initial half-mile shuffle to a brisk 2-mile circuit that took her through the neighborhood and around Steel Indian School Park. But it was during her Tuesday morning walk that everything changed. As she rounded the corner near the park's baseball diamonds, she noticed another early riser, a woman about her age doing what appeared to be an intense workout routine using nothing but a park bench and her own body weight. The woman moved with fluid precision through push-ups, step-ups, and exercises Jaz didn't recognize, her movements economical and purposeful. "Excuse me," Jaz found herself calling out before she could second-guess the impulse. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but what you're doing looks amazing. I'm kind of new to this whole fitness thing." The woman paused mid-burpee, not even slightly winded despite the obvious intensity of her workout. She was petite, maybe 5'2", with short auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of natural confidence that seemed to radiate from athletes. "I'm Rachel Chen," she said, extending a hand with a warm smile, "and you're not interrupting at all. I love meeting other early birds. Are you the one I've been seeing walking this route the past few weeks?" Jaz felt a flush of embarrassment. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed her awkward attempts at establishing a routine. "Yeah, that's me, Jaz Martinez. I'm still figuring out this whole exercise thing, to be honest." "We all start somewhere," Rachel said with genuine warmth. "Mind if I ask what got you started?" There was something about Rachel's demeanor, open, non-judgmental, genuinely interested, that made Jaz feel safe sharing. "I realized I was tired of being tired all the time. I work at my family's restaurant, and I couldn't even climb the stairs to the office without getting winded." Rachel nodded knowingly. "I get it. I used to be a different person, too. 3 years ago, I was working 60-hour weeks as a software engineer, living on energy drinks and takeout, completely disconnected from my body. Then I had what I call my wake-up call moment." "What happened?" Jaz asked, genuinely curious. "I passed out during a presentation to our biggest client. Stress, poor nutrition, zero physical activity. My body basically said, enough. That's when I discovered that fitness isn't just about looking a certain way. It's about feeling powerful in your own skin." Rachel explained that she'd left her corporate job 2 years ago to become a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach. She specialized in working with people who felt intimidated by traditional gyms or who had complicated relationships with food and exercise. "The thing most people don't realize," she continued, "is that sustainable change happens in layers. You can't just flip a switch and completely transform your life overnight, but you can build habits that compound over time." She gestured toward the park bench she'd been using. "Take this bench, for example. 3 years ago, I couldn't do a single push-up. Now I can do 30 without stopping. But I didn't get there by trying to do 30 on day one. I started with wall push-ups, then incline push-ups against this bench, then knee push-ups on the ground, and eventually full push-ups. Each stage built the strength I needed for the next level." Jaz found herself hanging on every word. This was completely different from every diet book she'd ever skimmed, every fitness magazine article she'd ever read. Rachel wasn't promising quick fixes or dramatic transformations. She was talking about progress as a process, about building something sustainable. "Can I show you something?" Rachel asked. "Just a few basic movements that you could incorporate into your walks?" For the next 20 minutes, Rachel guided Jaz through a series of simple exercises: wall push-ups against the park's restroom building, step-ups using the low concrete barrier around the playground, and modified squats using the bench for support. Nothing felt overwhelming or impossible. Each movement was scaled to Jaz's current ability level, but she could feel her muscles engaging in ways they hadn't in years.
The key, Rachel explained as she demonstrated proper squat form, is consistency over intensity. Would you rather do 10 squats every day for a month, or do 100 squats once and then give up because you're too sore to move? As they walked back toward the parking area, Rachel shared more of her philosophy. "I work with a lot of people who come from families where food equals love.
It's one of the most challenging dynamics to navigate because you're not just changing your habits, you're potentially challenging family traditions and relationships. Jaz felt like Rachel was reading her mind. That's exactly my situation. My family owns a Mexican restaurant. Every meal is a celebration. Every emotion gets processed through food. I don't even know how to separate my eating from my relationships with the people I love. Have you told them about your new routine? Rachel asked. Not exactly, Jaz admitted. I wake up before anyone else in the house, do my walk, shower, and then pretend nothing's different. I haven't changed how I eat at the restaurant yet. I guess I'm afraid of their reactions. Rachel stopped walking and turned to face Jaz directly. Here's something I learned the hard way. You can't protect other people's feelings at the expense of your own health. That doesn't mean you have to be confrontational or dramatic about it, but you do have to be honest about what you need. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. I'm going to give you my number, and I want you to consider something. What if you didn't have to figure this out alone? I offer coaching services, but honestly, even if we never work together professionally, I'd love to have a walking buddy a few mornings a week. This journey is so much easier when you have someone who understands what you're going through. Jaz felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope mixed with excitement. You'd really want to do that? Walk with me sometimes? Absolutely. And here's a thought. What if we met at different locations around the city? There's some incredible hiking trails in the Phoenix Mountain Preserve, beautiful neighborhoods in Scottsdale, even some interesting urban walks downtown. You could explore your own city while building your fitness base. The idea appealed to Jaz immediately. She'd lived in Phoenix her entire life, but had rarely ventured beyond her familiar neighborhoods. The prospect of discovering new places while building healthier habits felt like exactly the kind of adventure she'd been craving. There's something else I want you to think about, Rachel continued, as they reached their cars. Nutrition is obviously going to be a crucial part of your journey, but I don't want you to think of it as dieting. Instead, think of it as learning to fuel your body for the activities you want to do. When you start moving more, your body will naturally crave foods that support that movement. She paused thoughtfully. Since your family's in the restaurant business, you probably know a lot about food already. Ingredients, preparation methods, flavor profiles. That's actually a huge advantage. You understand food in ways that a lot of people don't. The challenge will be learning to apply that knowledge in service of your health goals rather than just comfort or tradition. As Jaz drove home that morning, her mind raced with possibilities. For the first time since starting her walks, she felt like she wasn't just wandering around aimlessly, hoping something would change. She had met someone who understood the complexity of what she was trying to accomplish, someone who could guide her without making her feel judged or inadequate. But more than that, she had glimpsed a different version of herself, someone who might actually enjoy being active, who could explore her city with confidence, who could honor her family's food traditions while still prioritizing her health. It felt revolutionary and terrifying and absolutely necessary all at once. The awakening had begun. Jaz was starting to understand that transformation wasn't just about losing weight. It was about gaining a completely new relationship with her body, her city, and ultimately, herself.
The moment of truth came on a Saturday evening during the Martinez family's monthly gathering. Jaz had been secretly working with Rachel for 2 weeks now, meeting her at different locations around Phoenix for increasingly challenging workouts. They'd hiked the easy trails at South Mountain, explored the canal paths in Scottsdale, and even tried a beginner-friendly rock climbing wall at a local gym. Each adventure had revealed new capabilities Jaz didn't know she possessed, but she hadn't told her family about any of it. The family gathering was at Uncle Roberto's house in Glendale, and, as usual, it was a feast of epic proportions. Carmen had spent the entire day preparing Roberto's favorite mole poblano, while Elena had made fresh tortillas and her legendary Mexican rice. Jaz's cousins brought sides: street corn, refried beans with chorizo, and tres leches cake from the bakery down the street from the restaurant. As everyone filled their plates for the second time, Jaz found herself doing something she'd never done before. She was actually paying attention to her hunger cues. Rachel had taught her to pause before eating and ask herself 3 questions. Am I actually hungry? What does my body need right now? And how will I feel after eating this? For the first time in her adult life, Jaz realized she wasn't hungry anymore. Her first plate had been reasonable, a serving of mole with chicken, some rice and vegetables. Her body felt satisfied, energized even. The old Jaz would have continued eating simply because the food was there and because everyone else was eating. But tonight felt different. Jaz, Mija, you're not eating, her grandmother Elena observed from across the table. Are you feeling okay? You look different somehow. The comment sent a ripple of attention around the table. Her mother, Carmen, looked up from her conversation with Roberto's wife, Maria. Her sister, Sofia, paused mid-bite to study Jaz's face. Even her teenage cousin, Miguel, glanced over from his phone. I feel great, actually. I've been doing some walking in the mornings, and I think it's giving me more energy. Walking? Carmen repeated, as if Jaz had announced she had taken up fire breathing. Since when do you walk, and where? Just around the neighborhood, mostly. Sometimes at different parks around the city. Jaz tried to keep her tone casual, but she could feel the weight of everyone's attention. Parks? This from Uncle Roberto, who had a talent for making even innocent activities sound vaguely suspicious. Which parks? It's not safe for a young woman to be walking alone, especially early in the morning. I'm usually with a friend, Jess said, immediately regretting the admission. What friend? Sofia asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Anyone we know? And there it was, the moment Jaz had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She could deflect, make excuses, minimize what she had been doing, or she could tell the truth and deal with whatever came next. Her name is Rachel Chen. She's a personal trainer I met at Steel Indian School Park. We've been meeting a few times a week for workouts and hikes. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour, though it was probably only a few seconds. Elena was the first to speak. A personal trainer? Elena's tone carried the particular skepticism she reserved for concepts she considered fundamentally suspicious. How much is this costing? We're still recovering from the pandemic losses at the restaurant. She's not charging me anything right now. We're just friends, I guess. She enjoys having a workout partner. Carmen set down her fork with the deliberate precision she used when she was processing something significant. Jaz, why didn't you tell us about this? We tell each other everything in this family. The hurt in her mother's voice cut deeper than anger would have. Jaz realized that her secrecy had been interpreted as rejection, as if she were ashamed of her family or trying to hide something shameful. I wasn't trying to be secretive, Jaz said, though even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. I just wanted to see if I could stick with something before I made a big announcement about it. Stick with what, exactly? Roberto asked. What's the goal here? This was the question Jaz had been asking herself for weeks. What was her goal? Weight loss seemed too simple, too focused on a number. Health felt too vague. Rachel had encouraged her to think beyond the physical transformation. I want to feel strong, Jaz said finally. I want to be able to climb those stairs at the restaurant without getting winded. I want to have energy at the end of the day instead of just collapsing on the couch. I want to feel like I can keep up with life instead of always feeling like I'm struggling to catch up.
Sofia reached across the table and squeezed Jaz's hand. That sounds really healthy, actually. I think it's cool that you found something you enjoy. But Elena looked troubled. Jaz, you know we love you exactly as you are, right? You don't need to change anything for us. You're perfect the way God made you. It was meant to be supportive, Jaz knew, but it felt like a gentle form of sabotage. The implication was clear. Wanting to change was somehow rejecting the person she'd always been, rejecting the family's acceptance of that person. I know you love me, Abuela, Jaz said carefully, and I'm not doing this because I think there's something wrong with who I am. I'm doing it because I want to become the strongest, healthiest version of myself. That's not rejecting who I've been. It's honoring who I could become. Carmen was studying her daughter with the intense focus she usually reserved for perfecting new recipes. "You do look different," she admitted. "Not just physically. There's something, I don't know, more confident about you lately." "That's what I was noticing too," Alana said slowly. "You're carrying yourself differently." The conversation continued for another hour, touching on everything from safety concerns, Roberto, to financial worries, Carmen, to curiosity about Rachel's background, Sofia. But underneath all the questions and concerns, Jaz sensed something deeper. Her family was trying to figure out how her changes might affect the family dynamic. Food had always been their love language, their way of caring for each other. If Jaz was changing her relationship with food, was she changing her relationship with them? As the evening wound down and family members began clearing dishes and preparing leftovers, Jaz made a decision that surprised even her. "Mom," she said, approaching Godman at the sink, "what if I cooked Sunday dinner for everyone next week, at the restaurant after we close?" Godman looked puzzled. "You want to cook Sunday dinner? But we always make Sunday dinner together." "I know, but I've been learning some things about nutrition and cooking methods that might be fun to experiment with. What if we made some of our traditional recipes, but with a few healthy modifications, just to see how they taste?" It was a risk. Jaz was essentially asking to mess with sacred family recipes, to suggest that their traditional cooking methods might be improved upon. But it was also an olive branch, a way of showing that her new interest didn't have to separate her from her family. They could potentially enhance their traditions. Godman considered this for a long moment. What kind of modifications? Maybe using Greek yogurt instead of sour cream in some dishes, grilling instead of frying where it makes sense, adding more vegetables. Small changes that preserve the flavors but make the meals more nutritionally balanced. To Jaz's surprise, Sofia appeared beside them, dish towel in hand. "Could I help? I've actually been curious about healthier cooking methods too, but I didn't want to say anything." Carmen looked between her daughters, and she could see her processing this new dynamic. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but if you ruin my abuela's mole recipe, you're both in trouble." As Jaz drove home that night, she felt something she hadn't expected. Relief mixed with anticipation. She'd crossed the point of no return. Her family now knew about her fitness journey, about Rachel, about her desire to change. There was no going back to sneaking out for morning walks and pretending nothing was different. But more importantly, she'd found a way to honor both her old life and her new goals. Sunday dinner would be her first real test. Could she maintain her commitment to health while still honoring her family's traditions? The commitment had been made, not just to herself, but to her family. Now came the real work of proving that transformation and tradition could coexist. The Sunday dinner experiment turned into a complete disaster, but not for the reasons Jaz had anticipated. She'd spent 3 days researching healthy modifications to traditional Mexican recipes, consulting with Rachel about ingredient substitutions, and even calling her friend Ashley in Seattle for advice on meal planning. The menu she'd planned was ambitious, but thoughtful. Grilled chicken with a lighter version of mole poblano, using dark chocolate instead of traditional lard. Cauliflower rice mixed with regular rice, black bean and vegetable enchiladas alongside the traditional cheese ones, and a fruit salad with lime and chili instead of tres leches cake. What Jaz hadn't planned for was her own body's rebellion. 2 hours into the cooking process, standing in the restaurant's industrial kitchen with Sofia chopping vegetables beside her, Jaz felt the familiar gnaw sensation in her stomach that she'd been experiencing more frequently lately. But this wasn't normal hunger. This was the desperate, almost panicky craving that had been hitting her at random times throughout the day. She'd been tracking her food intake with an app Rachel recommended, and the numbers were sobering. For years, she'd been eating upwards of 3,000 calories a day without realizing it. The portions at family meals were massive, and she developed a habit of grazing throughout her shifts at the restaurant. A bite of carnitas here, a spoonful of beans there, frequent samples of whatever Carmen was cooking. Now, trying to eat around 1,800 calories a day, her body was staging a full-scale revolt. "You okay?" Sofia asked, noticing that Jaz had stopped stirring the mole and was gripping the counter with white knuckles. "Yeah, just tired, I guess," Jaz lied. The truth was that she felt dizzy, irritable, and obsessively focused on the leftover carnitas in the walk-in cooler. She'd been fantasizing about them for the past 20 minutes. "Maybe you should eat something," Sofia suggested. "You've been working for hours and I haven't seen you take a break." That was part of the problem. Jaz had become so focused on controlling her food intake that she'd swung too far in the opposite direction. Rachel had warned her about this, the tendency to be overly restrictive in the beginning, which often led to binge episodes later. But Jaz felt like if she took even one bite of anything unplanned, she'd lose control completely. The fear was irrational but overwhelming. The family began arriving at 5 o'clock. Elena came first, carrying fresh tortillas and wearing the skeptical expression she reserved for departures from tradition. Uncle Roberto arrived with his wife Maria and their teenage son Miguel, all of them curious about Jaz's promised healthy versions of their favorite dishes. Carmen was the last to arrive, and Jaz could see her mother taking mental inventory of the spread, comparing it to their usual Sunday dinners. "It smells different," Elena announced, not necessarily as a compliment. "Different how?" Jaz asked, though she knew exactly what her grandmother meant. The mole, made without lard, and with significantly less sugar, had a sharper, more complex flavor profile. The cauliflower rice, despite being mixed with regular rice, had a different texture. Even the black bean enchiladas, which Jaz thought had turned out well, looked unfamiliar on the traditional serving platters. "It's not bad different," Elena clarified quickly, seeing Jaz's face. "Just different." The dinner conversation was stilted in a way that Sunday dinners had never been before. Usually these gatherings were loud, chaotic affairs with multiple conversations happening simultaneously, children running around and seconds and thirds being served without question. Tonight, everyone seemed to be weighing their words, conscious that they were participating in some kind of experiment. "The chicken is really flavorful," Sofia offered diplomatically, though she'd noticed that she'd taken only small portions of everything. "It's healthy," Roberta said, and somehow made it sound like a criticism. Miguel, with the brutal honesty of a 16-year-old, was more direct. "It tastes like diet food. Why are we eating diet food?" "It's not diet food," Jaz said, though even as she spoke, she could hear the defensive edge in her voice. But Miguel was right, and everyone knew it. The dinner felt like a performance of health consciousness rather than the authentic celebration of culture and family that their Sunday dinners had always been. Worse, Jaz found herself unable to enjoy any of it. She'd been so focused on the calorie content of each dish, so worried about how her family would react, so anxious about maintaining her new eating habits that she'd lost all connection to the actual experience of eating. Halfway through the meal, she excused herself to go to the bathroom and instead found herself standing in the restaurant's walk-in cooler, staring at the leftover carnitas from the week's service. The meat looked impossibly appealing, glistening with fat and seasoned with the perfect blend of spices Carmen had spent decades perfecting. Before she could stop herself, she grabbed a spoon and took a bite, then another. The flavors exploded across her tongue, rich, salty, comforting in a way that her carefully planned healthy dinner couldn't match. She took another bite, then another, standing in the cold storage room eating carnitas with a serving spoon like some kind of food-obsessed criminal. The guilt hit immediately. She'd just consumed probably 300 calories of pure fat and sodium, undoing hours of careful meal planning. Worse, she'd lied to her family about stepping away, and she was eating compulsively in a way that felt completely out of control. When she returned to the dining room, Carmen was studying her face with the laser focus of a mother who knew her daughter was hiding something.
"Everything okay, Mija?"
"Fine," Jaz said quickly, though she was sure the carnita smell was somehow detectable on her breath. The rest of the dinner crawled by. Elena made polite comments about the food but barely ate anything. Roberto and Maria exchanged glances that clearly communicated their thoughts about the whole healthy cooking experiment. Only Sofia seemed genuinely supportive, asking questions about the recipes and praising Jaz's effort. After everyone left, Jaz and Sofia stayed behind to clean up. As they washed dishes in the restaurant's industrial sink, Sofia finally addressed what they were both thinking. "That was kind of awkward, wasn't it?" she said gently. Jaz felt tears spring to her eyes unexpectedly. "I thought I could make it work. I thought I could find a way to honor our traditions while still taking care of my health, but it felt like I was asking everyone to pretend to enjoy food that wasn't as good as what we're used to." Maybe the problem isn't the food, Sofia said thoughtfully. Maybe it's trying to change everything at once. What if you focused on changing your own habits first and worried about family dinners later? It was wise advice, but it highlighted another struggle Jaz hadn't anticipated: the isolation of changing while everyone around you stayed the same. She was learning to crave different foods, to enjoy different activities, to value different things. But her family, understandably, wanted the Jaz they'd always known. The one who found comfort in food, who participated fully in their culinary traditions, who didn't make everyone else question their own choices by making different ones. The next morning, Jaz met Rachel for their usual workout at the Desert Botanical Garden, where they could walk the trails while talking. When Jaz described the dinner disaster and her subsequent binge episode in the cooler, Rachel listened without judgment. First of all, as they navigated a trail lined with towering saguaro cacti, Rachel said, "What you experienced last night, both the family tension and the emotional eating, is completely normal. You're not just changing your diet, you're changing your relationship with food, with your family, and with yourself. That's huge." "But I felt so out of control," Jaz admitted. "Standing in that cooler, eating carnitas with a serving spoon, it was like watching someone else do something crazy." "That's restriction backlash," Rachel explained. "When you're too rigid with your food rules, your body and brain eventually rebel. The key is finding a middle ground where you can make healthy choices most of the time without feeling deprived or panicked." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, passing other early morning visitors who were photographing the sunrise through the desert landscape. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel said eventually. "What would it look like if you gave yourself permission to eat some carnitas at family dinners? What if instead of trying to change the family meals, you just changed your portions and added a big salad or some extra vegetables to your plate?" The suggestion was both liberating and terrifying. It meant accepting that her transformation didn't have to be perfect, didn't have to convert her entire family to healthy eating. It meant trusting herself to make good choices most of the time while still participating in the food culture that was central to her family's identity. As they completed their loop through the garden, Jaz realized her early struggles weren't actually about willpower or discipline. They were about learning to navigate the complex intersection of personal change and family dynamics, of individual goals and cultural traditions. The path forward wouldn't be as simple as she had hoped, but maybe it didn't need to be simple. Maybe it just needed to be sustainable.
The breakthrough came on an ordinary Thursday morning in November, exactly 4 months after Jaz had first stepped on that bathroom scale. She was getting dressed for work when she reached for her favorite pair of jeans, the ones she'd been wearing for over 2 years, the ones that had gradually gotten tighter until she'd started avoiding them altogether. They fell off. Not they were loose, they literally slipped down her hips and pooled around her ankles as she was trying to button them. Jaz stood in her bedroom mirror, staring at herself in disbelief. When had this happened? She'd been so focused on the daily struggles, the hunger pangs, the family tensions, the workout challenges, that she hadn't noticed the cumulative effect of 4 months of consistent changes. She grabbed a belt from her closet, something she hadn't needed in years, and cinched the jeans tight. Even with the belt, they looked baggy and unflattering. For the first time since starting her transformation, Jaz felt excited about going shopping for clothes. But the real breakthrough came later that morning at the restaurant. Carmen was in the kitchen preparing for the lunch rush, working her way through a massive batch of tamales for a catering order. It was back-breaking work, standing for hours, lifting heavy pots, moving constantly between prep stations. Usually, Jaz helped with the administrative side, while Carmen handled the physical demands of cooking. "Mija, you look exhausted," Jaz said, noticing the way Carmen was massaging her lower back between tasks. "Why don't you let me take over the tamale assembly while you work on the inventory?" Carmen was skeptical. "Mija, this is a 40-dozen order for the Rodriguez wedding tomorrow. We can't afford any mistakes, and you haven't made tamales in bulk like this before." "Then teach me," Jaz said simply. "I've been getting stronger these past few months. I can handle it." What happened next surprised them both. Jaz didn't just handle the physical demands of tamale making, she thrived in it. The repetitive motions of spreading masa, adding filling, and wrapping corn husks became almost meditative.
Her arms, strengthened by months of Rachel's functional fitness workouts, didn't tire the way they would have before. Her back, supported by a core that had grown noticeably stronger, didn't ache from the prolonged standing. But more than the physical capability, Jaz found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in the restaurant kitchen for years: pure enjoyment. She was present in her body, aware of her movements, connected to the process in a way that felt entirely new. "You're different," Carmen observed, watching her daughter work with efficient, confident motions. "Not just physically, though you obviously are, but you're more, I don't know how to say it, more there, more present." It was exactly right. For years, Jaz had moved through her days feeling disconnected from her physical self, going through motions without really inhabiting her body. Now she could feel her muscles working, could sense her balance and coordination, could appreciate the simple pleasure of physical competence. As they worked side by side, Carmen began asking questions she'd never asked before. "This fitness routine you've been doing with Rachel, what exactly do you do? I mean, I know you walk and hike, but what else?" Jaz found herself describing functional movements: squats that mimicked getting up from chairs, lunges that improved stair climbing, planks that strengthened her core for exactly this kind of kitchen work. She explained how Rachel had taught her to think about exercise not as punishment for eating, but as preparation for living. "We don't just do random workouts," Jaz explained as she tied another perfect tamale. "Everything Rachel teaches me has a purpose. Like, we do farmer's carries with heavy weights so I can carry grocery bags or restaurant supplies without strain. We practice getting up from the floor without using our hands, so I'll have that ability when I'm older. We do balance exercises so I'm less likely to fall or get injured." Carmen was quiet for a few minutes, focused on her inventory sheets. Finally, she said, "I've been thinking about what you said at Roberto's house, about wanting to feel strong. I didn't understand it then, but watching you work today, I think I'm starting to." It was the first time Carmen had expressed any real interest in understanding Jaz's transformation, rather than just worrying about it or tolerating it. "Would you—" She stopped, looking almost embarrassed. "Would you think Rachel would be willing to meet me? Not for training, necessarily, but just to talk. I've been having some aches and pains lately, and my doctor keeps saying I need to be more active, but I don't know where to start." Jaz felt her heart skip. "Mom, are you serious? You want to meet Rachel?" "Don't make a big deal out of it," Carmen said quickly. "I'm just curious, and maybe I could use some of that strength you've been talking about." That afternoon, after the lunch rush died down, Jaz called Rachel from the restaurant office. When she explained her mother's interest, Rachel's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Of course I'd love to meet her. And you know what? I think this is huge for you, Jaz. Having family support, or even just family understanding, can completely change the trajectory of someone's health journey."
They arranged for Rachel to stop by the restaurant the next day during the quiet afternoon hours. Jaz felt nervous excitement building in her chest, the same feeling she'd had before her first hike with Rachel, or before that disastrous Sunday dinner. But this time, the nervousness was tinged with hope rather than dread. The meeting exceeded Jaz's wildest expectations. Rachel arrived at 3 p.m., dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, carrying a small gift bag. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, extending her hand to Carmen with genuine warmth, "I've heard so much about you. Jaz talks about your cooking with such love and pride." Carmen, who had been clearly nervous, relaxed immediately. "Please, call me Carmen, and thank you for helping my daughter. She's like a different person these past few months." "She's the same person," Rachel corrected gently, "just a stronger, more confident version of herself." The gift bag contained something Jaz hadn't expected: a cookbook called Nourished Kitchen, Traditional Foods Made Healthier. But it wasn't a typical diet cookbook. It was specifically focused on maintaining the authentic flavors of cultural cuisines while incorporating more nutritious ingredients and cooking methods. "I thought you might be interested in this, Carmen. It has a whole section on Mexican and Latin American foods. The author's philosophy is that healthy eating should enhance cultural traditions, not replace them." For the next hour, the three women sat in the restaurant's dining room, poring over recipes and discussing the intersection of tradition and health. Carmen asked thoughtful questions about ingredient substitutions, cooking methods, and portion sizes. Rachel shared her own family story, how her Chinese grandmother had initially been resistant to her fitness career until she realized that Rachel's knowledge could help preserve their family's longevity. But the most significant moment came when Carmen asked to see some of the basic exercises Jaz had been learning. Just simple things, she specified. I don't want to do anything dramatic, but if there are movements that could help with my back pain or make kitchen work easier. Rachel's eyes lit up. Absolutely. Jaz, would you mind demonstrating some of the exercises we've been working on? For the next 20 minutes, Jaz found herself in the surreal position of teaching her mother basic squats, wall push-ups, and gentle stretching routines. Carmen was a surprisingly eager student, asking questions about form and expressing amazement at Jaz's strength and flexibility. When did you get so coordinated? Carmen asked, watching Jaz demonstrate a single leg balance exercise. You used to trip over your own feet. It was true. Jaz had been clumsy for most of her life, always bumping into furniture or stumbling on uneven surfaces. But months of functional fitness training had developed not just her strength, but her proprioception, her body's awareness of itself in space. As Rachel prepared to leave, she made an unexpected offer. Carmen, if you're interested, I run a gentle movement class for people over 50 on Saturday mornings at the community center. It's specifically designed for people who are new to exercise or who have physical limitations. No pressure at all, but you'd be welcome to join us anytime. Carmen looked at Jaz, then back at Rachel. Could Jaz come with me, at least the first time? Of course, Rachel smiled, though I think you'll find you're braver than you realize. That evening, as Jaz helped her mother close the restaurant, Carmen made an observation that crystallized the day's significance. You know what I realized today? I've been afraid that your changes meant that you were rejecting our family, our culture, our way of life. But listening to you and Rachel talk, it's not about rejection at all, is it? It's about taking the best of what we have and making it even better. Jaz felt tears prick her eyes. That's exactly it, Mom. I don't want to stop being Mexican or stop loving food or stop celebrating with the family. I just want to do all of those things from a place of strength and health instead of compulsion and exhaustion. Carmen nodded slowly. I think I'm ready to try that too. The first breakthrough had arrived, and it was bigger than loose jeans or increased strength. It was the moment when transformation stopped being a solitary struggle and became a family journey towards something better. The crisis began on a rainy December morning when Jaz's phone rang at 4:47 a.m. It was Uncle Roberto, his voice tight with panic. Jaz, you need to get to Banner Desert Medical Center right now. It's your grandmother. Elena had collapsed in her bathroom during the night. By the time Roberto found her, he'd been staying at her house since his own heart attack the previous year. She was unconscious and barely breathing. The paramedics suspected a stroke. Jaz threw on clothes and raced to the hospital, her mind spinning with terror and guilt. She'd been so focused on her own transformation, so consumed with workout schedules and meal planning and family dinner negotiations, that she'd barely noticed her grandmother had been moving more slowly lately, seeming more tired than usual. The next 72 hours blurred together in a nightmare of hospital corridors, medical consultations, and family vigils. Elena had indeed suffered a stroke. Not massive, but significant enough to affect her speech and mobility on her left side. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery potential, but they warned that rehabilitation would be long and challenging. What they didn't say, but what everyone understood, was that Elena would need intensive care and support. And in the Martinez family, that responsibility would naturally fall to the women. We'll need to take shifts, Carmen announced during a family meeting in the hospital cafeteria on the third day. Someone needs to be with Mama around the clock once she's released. The physical therapy schedule alone is going to be overwhelming. Jaz nodded automatically, but her stomach was already clenching with dread. Not about caring for her grandmother. She loved Elena fiercely and would do anything for her. But about what this would mean for the fragile routine she'd spent 6 months building. The next 3 weeks proved her fears justified. Elena came home requiring assistance with basic activities: bathing, dressing, preparing meals. Her speech was slurred and often frustrating for her, which led to emotional outbursts that were heartbreaking for the family to witness. The physical therapy sessions were scheduled 3 times a week at 10 a.m., which meant Jaz had to abandon her morning workouts with Rachel to drive Elena to appointments. Worse, the family's eating patterns completely collapsed under the stress. Carmen, exhausted from overnight shifts at Elena's bedside, began relying on takeout and convenience foods. Sunday dinners were replaced with hurried meals eaten standing in hospital corridors or Elena's kitchen while managing medications and therapy schedules. Jaz found herself eating erratically, sometimes skipping meals entirely when she was too busy or anxious to think about food. Other times, stress eating whatever was convenient. The careful meal planning and portion control she'd developed over 6 months vanished under the relentless demands of caregiving. "I feel like I'm drowning," she confessed to Rachel during their first phone conversation in 2 weeks. "I know Elena needs me, and I want to be there for her, but I can feel everything I've worked for just slipping away." "Tell me what a typical day looks like now," Rachel said gently. Jaz described the new reality: waking up at 6 a.m. to help Elena with morning medications and breakfast, spending the morning either at physical therapy appointments or handling restaurant paperwork that had been neglected, grabbing lunch from whatever fast food was convenient, spending afternoons either at Elena's house or covering extra shifts at the restaurant to make up for Carmen's absences, then eating dinner late while exhausted and stressed. "I've gained back 8 pounds, Jaz admitted, voicing the number that had been haunting her since stepping on the scale that morning. 8 pounds in 3 weeks. At this rate, I'll be right back where I started by spring. But the weight gain, as devastating as it felt, wasn't actually the worst part. The worst part was how disconnected she felt from her body again. The strength and confidence she'd built over 6 months seemed to have evaporated. She felt sluggish, anxious, and most damaging of all, hopeless. "I don't think I can do this," she told Rachel. "I thought I had changed, but maybe I was just fooling myself. Maybe this is who I really am, someone who falls apart the minute life gets difficult." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "Jaz, can I ask you something? In these 3 weeks of caring for Elena, how many days have you completely abandoned healthy choices?" Jaz thought about it. "I don't know. Most of them?" "Really? Let me ask more specifically. How many days have you eaten nothing but junk food?" "Well, none, I guess. I usually have oatmeal for breakfast because it's quick and filling." "And how many days have you had 0 physical activity?" "I mean, I'm on my feet constantly at the hospital and Elena's house, and I'm helping her with physical therapy exercises. So you're eating some healthy foods, and you're staying physically active, just not in the structured way you were before?" Rachel's questions revealed something Jaz hadn't considered. She hadn't completely abandoned her healthy habits. She'd adapted them to an impossible situation. And while the adaptations weren't perfect, they weren't the complete failure she'd convinced herself they were. "But I've gained 8 pounds, Jaz protested. "In 3 weeks of extraordinary stress while providing intensive caregiving for a family member recovering from a stroke," Rachel pointed out. "Jaz, you're not a machine. You're a human being dealing with a crisis. The fact that you've only gained 8 pounds and that you're still making any healthy choices at all is actually remarkable." The conversation continued for another hour, with Rachel helping Jaz reframe the situation. This wasn't a failure of willpower. It was a test of her ability to maintain her identity and priorities while adapting to changed circumstances. "What would it look like if you gave yourself permission to be imperfect right now?" Rachel asked. What if instead of trying to maintain your previous routine, you focused on just one or two non-negotiable habits that you could realistically maintain no matter how chaotic things get? The question sparked something in Jaz. What if she stopped trying to be the person she'd been 6 months ago, someone with unlimited time and energy for self-care, and started figuring out how to be healthy within her current reality? Over the next week, she experimented with tiny, sustainable changes. Instead of skipping meals, she packed protein bars and fruit in her bag for Elena's appointments. Instead of abandoning exercise entirely, she did 10 minutes of stretching or bodyweight exercises in Elena's living room while Elena napped. Instead of ordering takeout every night, she prepared simple, nutritious meals that could be eaten quickly and reheated easily. Most importantly, she started involving Elena in her recovery process rather than seeing caregiving as separate from her own health goals. "Abuela," she said one afternoon while Elena was doing her speech therapy exercises, "would you mind if I did some exercises too while you're working? I've been feeling really stiff lately, and it might be good for both of us to move together." Elena, who had been frustrated by her slow progress with speech therapy, lit up at the suggestion. "See, Mija, show me what you do." What followed was unexpectedly beautiful. Jaz did modified squats and lunges while Elena worked on her arm exercises. They did seated stretches together, with Elena adapting movements Elena could perform despite her limited mobility. Elena even began offering encouragement for Jaz's exercises, something that felt like a complete reversal of their old dynamic. "You are strong now," Elena said one afternoon, her words still slightly slurred, but her meaning crystal clear. "Before, I worry you have no strength. Now, I see you have strength for both of us." The comment hit Jaz like lightning. She had been thinking of Elena's stroke as derailing her transformation, but what if it was actually revealing how much she had truly changed? 6 months ago, a crisis like this would have sent her into complete emotional eating spirals. She would have gained 20 pounds, not 8. She would have stopped all physical activity, not just modified it. She would have felt like a victim of circumstances, rather than someone who could adapt and find solutions. 3 weeks later, when Elena had recovered enough speech and mobility to return to limited activity, Jaz stepped on the scale, expecting the worst. She'd lost 3 of the 8 pounds she had gained, not through extreme dieting or punitive exercise, but through consistent small choices and the physical demands of caregiving combined with her adapted fitness routine. But the real victory wasn't the number on the scale. It was the realization that her transformation hadn't been derailed by crisis, it had been tested and proven resilient. The major setback had become proof that she was stronger than she had ever imagined.
1 year and 3 months after that first morning walk, Jaz Martinez stood in her apartment bathroom looking at a reflection she barely recognized. The scale read 162 pounds, a total loss of 78 pounds, but the number felt almost irrelevant compared to everything else that had changed. The woman looking back at her had muscles visible in her arms and shoulders. Her face had emerged from years of puffiness, revealing high cheekbones she'd inherited from Elena and a jawline that reminded her of her father. But more than the physical transformation, there was something entirely different in her eyes, a confidence and self-possession that hadn't been there before. Today was the day she'd been anticipating and dreading in equal measure, the first annual Martinez Family Health Challenge, an event she'd proposed 3 months earlier and which had somehow snowballed into a neighborhood-wide celebration. The idea had emerged during one of Elena's recovery sessions. Her grandmother, now walking with only a slight limp and speaking clearly again, had been frustrated by her ongoing physical limitations. "I feel so weak, Mija," she'd complained after struggling to open a jar of salsa, "like my body betrayed me." "What if we worked together to make your body strong again?" Jaz had suggested. "Not just physical therapy, but really building your strength back. And what if we invited the whole family to join us?" The suggestion had seemed impossible at first. Roberto was still recovering from his heart attack and remained skeptical of fitness trends. Carmen had joined Rachel's senior movement class, but was still tentative about anything too ambitious. Sofia was enthusiastic, but busy with her job at a marketing firm in Scottsdale. But somehow, over the following weeks, the family had rallied around the idea. Roberto, inspired by Elena's determination, had started walking with her in the evenings. Carmen had progressed from basic movements to actual strength training with Rachel. Sofia had begun training for her first 5K race. Most surprisingly, the extended family and restaurant customers had gotten involved. Miguel, Roberto's teenage son, had started coming to Rachel's boot camp classes. Several regular customers at Abuela's Kitchen had asked Carmen about the healthy menu options they'd heard about. Even Elena's neighbors had begun joining the evening walks. Today's event was being held at Steele Indian School Park, the same place where Jaz had first met Rachel 15 months earlier, but instead of a solitary morning workout, the park was filled with 3 generations of the Martinez family and dozens of their friends, all participating in various fitness activities. "Are you ready for this?" Rachel asked near the registration table they'd set up under a ramada. Rachel had volunteered to coordinate the fitness stations, while Carmen and Elena were managing a healthy food booth featuring modified versions of traditional Mexican dishes. "I think so," Jaz replied, though her stomach was fluttering with nervous energy. "It's just surreal, you know? A year ago, I could barely walk 2 miles without stopping. Now we're hosting a community fitness event at the place where I used to feel like the most out-of-shape person in Phoenix." The day's activities were designed to be inclusive rather than competitive. There were walking groups for different fitness levels, gentle yoga sessions led by one of Rachel's colleagues, a playground obstacle course for the kids, and strength training demonstrations using body weight and basic equipment. But the real magic happened in the spaces between organized activities. Jaz watched her Uncle Roberto helping Elena navigate the balance beam they'd set up, both of them laughing as they wobbled through the exercise. She saw Carmen confidently demonstrating proper squat form to a group of restaurant customers who'd been asking about her new energy. Sofia was leading a group of teenagers through a dance fitness routine, combining traditional Mexican folk dance moves with cardio exercises. Most powerful moment came during the afternoon's main event, a 1-mile walk-run that anyone could complete at their own pace. Jaz had intended to jog the route at a moderate pace, but as the group started moving, she found herself naturally falling into step with Elena, who was walking determinedly with her lightweight walking sticks. "Abuela, you don't have to stay with me," Elena said, noticing that Jaz was matching her slower pace. "Go run with the young people." "I am exactly where I want to be," Jaz replied, and realized it was completely true. As they walked together, Elena began talking about something she'd never discussed before, her own relationship with her body and health. "When I was your age in Mexico, women didn't think about exercise or fitness. We worked hard, in the fields, in the kitchen, caring for children, but we never thought about taking care of our bodies for ourselves. Our bodies were for serving others." She paused to catch her breath, then continued. "When I got sick, I realized I had spent 78 years never thinking about what my body needed, only what I could give to my family through my body." Jaz felt tears welling up. "But you gave us so much, Abuela. The restaurant, the traditions, the love, all of that came through your work." "See, and I don't regret that. But watching you this past year, you found a way to be strong for yourself and for the family. That's something I never learned." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, surrounded by the chatter and laughter of their extended family and friends. As they approached the finish line, a colorful banner Sofia had made featuring the restaurant's logo alongside motivational phrases in both English and Spanish, Jaz realized something profound had shifted in her understanding of her transformation.
This hadn't been about losing weight or even about getting healthy. It had been about discovering that she could change fundamental patterns in her life while still honoring everything that was important to her. She could be strong and still be Mexican. She could prioritize her health and still show love through food. She could challenge family traditions and still belong completely to her family. At the finish line, the entire Martinez clan was waiting to cheer on Elena and Jaz. Carmen had tears streaming down her face. Roberto was applauding enthusiastically, despite his usual restraint. Sofia was taking photos with her phone, documenting every moment. But the most meaningful reaction came from Rachel, who approached Jaz as the crowd began dispersing toward the food booths. "Do you know what you've accomplished here?" Rachel asked, gesturing toward the scene around them. Multiple generations of a Mexican-American family celebrating fitness and health together, incorporating traditional foods in healthier preparations, making wellness a community activity rather than an individual struggle. "I learned to take care of myself?" Jaz offered, though she sensed Rachel was getting at something bigger. "You learned how to transform yourself without losing yourself," Rachel said. "And in the process, you created space for everyone around you to transform too. That's not just personal change. That's cultural change." As the day wound down and families began packing up their picnic supplies and folding chairs, Jaz found herself standing in the same spot where she'd first approached Rachel 15 months earlier. The park looked different now, not just because it was filled with her loved ones instead of empty, but because she was seeing it through completely different eyes. The woman who had first walked this path had been desperate and exhausted, disconnected from her body and uncertain about her future. The woman standing here now was strong, confident, and deeply connected not just to her physical self, but to her community and culture. As she helped load chairs into Roberto's truck, Carmen pulled her aside. "Mija, I need to tell you something," Carmen said, her voice unusually serious. "When you first started all this fitness business, I was scared. I thought you were rejecting us, rejecting who you were. I thought you would become someone who looked down on our food, our traditions, our way of life." She paused, watching Elena directing the cleanup with her characteristic determination. "But what you actually did was show us how to make our traditions stronger. The restaurant is busier than ever because people know we care about their health as well as their happiness. Elena is stronger at 79 than she was at 77. I can work full days without my back hurting. Sofia is confident in her body for the first time in her life." Carmen hugged her daughter tightly. "You didn't change who we are. You helped us become the best version of who we are." That night, Jaz sat in her apartment, the same apartment above the restaurant where she'd made her first commitment to change, writing in the journal Rachel had encouraged her to keep. As she reflected on the day's events and the year that had led to them, she realized that her transformation story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. The young woman who had once felt trapped by her weight, her family dynamics, and her limited vision of what was possible had discovered something revolutionary. Change didn't require abandoning who you are. It required becoming more fully yourself. And in becoming more fully herself, she had given her entire family permission to do the same. The numbers told part of the story. 78 pounds lost, blood pressure normalized, energy levels transformed. But the real story was in the laughter of 3 generations exercising together, in the pride on Elena's face as she completed her first mile since her stroke, in the healthy Mexican food served with love and intention. Jaz Martinez had lost weight, but more importantly, she had found herself. And in finding herself, she had helped her family find a new way of being together, one that honored their past while embracing their potential for an even healthier, stronger future. The transformation was complete, but the journey would continue for the rest of her life.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.